There was a time when resources seemed endless. But in 2030, the great energy crisis began. With hardly any resources left on our world, global powers created the World Space Agency to look beyond the Earth for answers. The answer was found in helium-3, a powerful isotope discovered in abundance on the Moon. With it, humanity could satisfy its energy demand for decades to come. And so, in 2032, mankind colonized the Moon. Spearheaded by the Lunar Council, the WSA constructed several permanent settlements to harvest and process helium-3. The resulting energy was transferred to Earth through a revolutionary energy network, the Microwave Power Transmission, or MPT. For a time, all seemed well. Then, one fateful night in 2054, the lights went out. No energy. The MPT had gone offline, and communication with the lunar colonist was lost. Without earthly resources to launch a full-scale rescue mission to the Moon, the World Space Agency was shut down permanently in 2055. But a small group of former WSA colonists refused to accept humanity's bleak future. Determined to discover the colony's fate and to restore the MPT, they've been preparing their mission in an abandoned desert launch facility. Now, in 2059, they are ready to launch an astronaut to the Moon. What awaits is unknown and unforeseeable, but the mission is clear. Deliver us the Moon.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima and I'm here to talk to you about Deliver Us the Moon. I know it's an unusual choice, but it's taking me longer than expected to get through Uno, and Spirit Hunter NG came out yesterday and I've had basically no time for it, so I needed to buy myself a little time. When this review code popped up in my inbox, I actually found myself pretty interested in it. This came out a little while ago, and by a little while ago, I mean, actually, the story behind this game is a little weird. It was originally released in an incomplete state. They didn't have it as early access or anything. They just had it along the lines of, oh yeah, we're going to put this out with like 5 levels out of 6 and leave a giant cliffhanger at the very end. But we have a new publisher which will let us polish the entire experience, add things like ray tracing, and just, you know, make the game generally better overall. So we're going to pull the game from sale and then re-release it again with the new chapter, and that's what they've done with this version. It's why I was really confused at first, because when I popped onto the reviews, it said something along the lines of, the game's only 2 hours long and ends in a cliffhanger. And while I was playing it, I thought to myself, this ain't right, because it definitely didn't end in a cliffhanger. But when I found out where the cliffhanger was, I was like, oh, okay, this makes perfect sense. But yes, this is the complete everything in it version. The entire story is told. All of those things, you know. So I've gone and I've played all the way through it. I got through the main story in about 4 hours, but on the hunt for the collectibles to find out the rest of the story, it took another 2 hours off the bloody time. So, yeah. Something like 5 to 6 hours overall. There are also a bunch of like extra challenges you can do for Steam achievements, but they aren't really worth the time. We're just talking about things like, you know, get onto the rocket ship at the beginning of the game with like 2 seconds left on the clock, and find a particular object and just spin it around for ages. Just minor things like that. They don't have any effect on the story or the unlockables or anything. You can just do them for fun if you feel like it, so whatever. And I did say this game has ray tracing, but not this version. Not the version that I am playing at this particular moment. There is no ray tracing yet, to my knowledge. I went and looked through the options, which are pretty lightweight for an Unreal Engine 4 game, and there doesn't seem to be anything in the way of ray tracing. With that said, though, let me just talk about this game's graphics for a moment, because it is absolutely gorgeous. Honestly, the amount of work that's been put into this game to make it look like one of the best things I've ever played is ridiculous. Everything is well detailed. There are a bunch of just amazing looking set pieces. The first time you get out on the moon reminded me very, very pleasantly of playing Prey when you first go into open space in that game. And honestly, in some situations, this game looks better than Prey. And by Prey, I'm talking about the 2016, was it? Reboot of the series and not the original one from 2005. I know some people will probably think that's heresy in the PC gaming space, but whatever, I absolutely loved the reboot of Prey, and I'm so disappointed it didn't sell even remotely well, but anyway, different topic for another time. I need to do a better late than never on that game someday, but yeah. This game's gameplay can be... I don't want to describe it as a walking simulator, because it really isn't, not in the grand scheme of things. It does have some gameplay mechanics. You move objects around. In some situations, like the one that's being displayed on screen right now, you need to keep your oxygen meter up. There are some things that you need to do, like cut things, move things around, and there is even a bit of light platforming from time to time, which gives the game a lot more of an in-there feel than your typical walking simulator. So I would say it's more fair to classify this game as just an adventure game. Like a full-on adventure from back in the day when adventure used to actually mean something, before action got slapped on the beginning of it for every single game ever. But yeah, it is an adventure game. You float around in space, you walk around on the ground in third person, you pick up objects and move them around, you cut things with a cutter that you get during this level, which will get shown off a fair bit, and sometimes the game will throw a timed set piece at you where you have to more or less run for it and hope for the best. And that's basically the entire game. I'm not going to say the gameplay isn't a little thin on the ground, but what's there works well enough and serves purpose. So I don't feel any particular ill will towards this game's gameplay at all. It is solid enough that I found myself enjoying it a fair bit. And there are parts of it which are pretty outstanding. As I said before, the game does have a bunch of set pieces. There's one in this particular video. I've included only the Pearson Station level in this video because I feel like showing off too much more would be spoilers, but yeah, basically to spoil the events of this upcoming video, the space station blows up and you're floating out in space and you have to float back, and again, gorgeous. It's unbelievable just how much that a small independent team that got funded by Kickstarter 4 years ago managed to get done on this engine. It legitimately looks like one of the best games I've played in years. And just floating out in space, looking at the station just floating in 100 million different bits in front of you is legitimately really impressive. And they do a good job with implementing all of these little areas as part of the game's story. Now, the game's story is something that is interesting in a lot of different ways. Now, the general summation of the plot, and if I remember to, I will probably put the original intro to this game in the... what's it called? I'll put the intro to this game in the beginning of the video because it basically gives you the exact idea. Earth's gone to hell. We managed to save ourselves via pulling energy from the moon, but the energy from the moon went to hell. It's gone. Nobody knows what happened to it. And 5 years after the energy from the moon went away, you're going back up in order to try and get it back online. God forbid that the entire thing lasted that long, but whatever. So yeah, that's basically the entire plot. It's more or less you going through the station, figuring out what happened to begin with, and trying to turn the station back on, obviously. And it's interesting. They do a really interesting job of it. They have these holograms sitting around that you can activate, and when you activate them, you get a little cutscene that's either shown from their predetermined perspective, or you can toggle the ability to walk around in third person and watch it that way, which is a neat touch. I actually kind of appreciate that. When you do that, you can just walk around and watch them interact with each other. However, there's no, like, actual characters in the sense that they're displayed as, like, actual characters. They're just displayed as, like, silhouettes, more or less. So you just have to stand there and watch a bunch of silhouettes talking. And you have to rely entirely on their voices and their actions in the holograms in order to determine who they are. And what they've done is really interesting. I find it to be a really interesting take on the whole reconstruct what happened years after the fact situation. I'm pretty sure there are some games that have done it before, but they do a good job here because they present events out of order and you have to try and put it together yourself, which makes the story interesting to listen to, interesting to find out about, and you do get a few interesting characters here and there. However, I do feel a couple of them go underused. The more important ones get more time, but there are a couple that end up kind of annoying me in the long run, just due to how little importance they seem to have. Like, there's one character who, after you finish the main plot and then unlock the little extra stuff they include off to the side, you think, why wasn't this character given more time? They show up in like one cutscene, end up being really important, and then just kind of fizzle away. There's a couple of plot threads that are like that as well, where they do tell you what's going on, but you end up thinking to yourself, I wish there was more to this plot. I don't want to get into spoilers, because I do feel like that it's important that the story remain as unspoiled as possible, but there are a couple of places where you think to yourself, well, what happened there? Why on earth am I not being told more about this? Because this sounds like a really interesting concept. And one of the best examples I can pull up, and I will actually spoil this because it's in the very first level, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling it. They give you this little monologue on the radio at the very beginning of the game, where it says something along the lines of, Earth has been covered by desert. Like, it's 30% landmass is desert at this point, and it's only getting worse. And the temperatures are so far out of control that 46 degrees is a mild day in the northern hemisphere. The entire northern hemisphere. I want to hear more about this, but it's just kind of a case of like narrative blue balls, because you're sitting there, you hear this radio broadcast and you think to yourself, can I learn more about this Earth? Can I learn more about just how bad things have gone? But they don't let you do that, unfortunately. It's kind of depressing, if I'm being perfectly honest, because I just want to hear more about it. At the end of Deliver Us the Moon, the one thing I thought to myself was, is there more to this? Can I hear more to this story? Can I hear more about the Earth? What happened to so-and-so that caused the power blackout up on the moon colony? Again, I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as possible because half the plot is trying to figure out what happened to these people. And yeah, you don't get as much as you might hope for, which is depressing in all honesty. I want more. I'd like to see more. There are plenty of like interactive objects that you can go and play with, and there are some that you have to scan, and when you scan them, they get added to your database and they help fill out the story a little bit, and you have to scan every object in the game in order to get an idea of like a certain event that happens in the plot. Like one of the major events that happens in the plot, you find out what happened to them as a result of getting everything in the first 5 levels. Then in the final level, there are 3 more sets of scannable collectibles that add their own little thing on the end. And for the life of me, I don't know why they bothered with that second one, because you would think they would add more about the first set of unlockables, because the first set of unlockables is really interesting. If you're making an active effort to actually get all of the scannable stuff in the first 5 levels, it'll slowly unlock the encrypted transmission so that you can see like a little progress bar of what's going on. And there are a couple of things that happen along that line that make you think, oh god, what happened to them? And well, you'll find out. It's it's just a little weird when they do it again for the 6th level, because it's obvious the 6th level was developed not so much separately, but it's obvious they had to do it at the end of the development. So when the 2nd set of unlockables actually happens, you find yourself talking to a character who just kind of vanished off the face of the earth, and they're talking about something that really has no context as far as I can tell. I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about. I'm guessing that the event that happens convinces the Earth to go after them, but again, I don't really know. It's a little weird. As I said before, I don't know if it's meant to be a sequel hook, but the game just kind of leaves not so much plot threads hanging, because we know what happens to basically everybody except one character. It's just... there are a couple of things that I just wish were filled out more. That seems to be the main point of contention for the story for me personally. The puzzles themselves are really simple. Most of the time you'll find, like, just passwords hanging up on the wall. Most of the time you'll find, like, little holes that you'll send your little controllable robot into. You get a controllable robot that you can remotely run through tubes to unlock doors for you. And there are simple, as I said before, pushing and pulling puzzles and platforming puzzles. And there are a couple of neat puzzles that require you to use a little cutting beam that you get. But it's all relatively simple. They give you a fair bit of leeway. It's a very easy game, and it's quite enjoyable, actually, because of that. They're very frequent with the checkpoints, and they don't mind letting you die once or twice. There is one particular event at the very end of the game which kind of annoyed me, because you have to be pretty precise about it, but every other event in the game gives you a fair amount of leeway as to how you do it. Some people might be annoyed that the game is a little bit too easy in the long run, but honestly, I didn't mind. I think the game was designed to be more cinematic than anything, so when you say cinematic, you mean it's relatively easy to get through for the sorts of people who aren't particularly great at games, and frankly, I felt challenged enough. It didn't feel like a challengeless game at all, which again is kind of why I kind of decry the term walking simulator for this game specifically, because they do put a fair amount of challenge and sort of excitement into it. Again, I can't really say too much without getting into spoilers, but you get to do things like drive a buggy around on the moon. There's a couple of quick time events here and there which are relatively sudden, and you get a few other things too, like being able to spacewalk, which is pretty neat. It's all well polished, it's all well put together. The only real problem I would say this game has is the optimization. While the game mostly runs at... I played this game without the ray tracing, which is kind of annoying. I actually have a card that's capable of ray tracing, but at the time I was doing this video, it wasn't enabled yet. So I wasn't able to actually play that mode. But it was able to maintain a pretty stable frame rate, but there were multiple points in the game where it was like... it was loading in resources and clearly having a little bit of a problem with optimization at that point, where the frame rate would very considerably stutter. Makes me worry about the console versions they plan on bringing out in 2020, but for the most part, it did run okay. I'm not particularly annoyed by the overall performance of the game on PC. Although, considering I've got a pretty high-end rig, some other people may feel differently about this. My rig is a A700K, an RTX 2080, and 16GB RAM, so that's a pretty good rig for a game like this, and I was playing on the epic graphics settings the entire time, so... yeah, I mean, it ran fine for me, but I'm on a pretty high-end rig. Your mileage may vary. There is voice acting, and it's pretty good. There's nothing wrong with the voice acting, actually. There's a fair bit of it, too. You've got stuff like the hologram events, which I don't think get shown in this video, actually, which is a little disappointing. But again, it's all spoilers, so you kind of want to leave it as much as humanly possible. But Yeah, there is voice acting. It is actually pretty well done. It's a little lightweight, I think is the word. Like, it's not overly dramatic about everything, which is actually kind of a nice touch, considering these would just be normal people. And there are a couple of people who, to put it frankly, go insane over the course of this game. And they're well done. And there's a couple of, like, you know, desperate situations where people... It's overall good voice acting, actually. I didn't mind it in the slightest. You don't actually see another human being in this game. It's all either holograms or... voice recordings, which is, again, a nice touch, because it does help you feel pretty lonely on this space station. It's very isolated. It helps you feel quite claustrophobic in certain areas, which is again, it's a space station, that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And again, the overall level of the graphics and some interactions, it can be a little bit weird when you float right through certain objects and then bump into others and send them flying across the room, but I've got nothing particularly wrong with the way the game presents itself overall. And the story at the end of the day still is interesting.
Can you find your way back to the
Again, finding out about what happened to all these people and just how they died. Or, not how they died, honestly, that's not a spoiler. Or how they got into the situations they're in is interesting. Finding out what happened to this space station is interesting. Finding out who you're playing as is interesting, because that's actually a bit of a mystery that they don't elaborate on until way later in the game. And finding out your own personal motivation, yeah. And it knows the length it needs to be to not outstay its welcome for your initial run, at the very least. As I said before, it only took me 4 hours to get through the entire game, and I think that's a pretty fair runtime. They knew just how long it would need to be in order to not outstay its welcome. And just by the time you feel like everything is starting to get a little old, they start ramping things up. By the time you get to the final level. Hell, the final level even has like a stealth section in it, which I thought was kind of neat. What else do I have to say about it? I'm honestly not entirely sure. It is a really well done adventure game with a focus on its narrative, though. I guess when your major complaint about it is that I wish there was more to it in the way of, like, universe building and overall narrative, just so you could know more about this world and the people in it and what the hell they're doing to survive when the Earth has turned into 30% desert, is a good thing, I suppose. Like, yeah, a narrative adventure that leaves you wanting more, while at the same time knowing exactly how long it needs to be in order to not outstay its welcome. That's pretty rare. And that's pretty well done. I enjoyed my time with Deliver Us the Moon, I should say. And would I recommend it? Well, it's $35.95 Australian. I didn't pay for it. I got review code, just in case you didn't catch it earlier on in the video. Would I recommend it for that price? Maybe. It might be a little bit much for 4 hours for some people, but it is an enjoyable 4 hours. Maybe if they gave me like a little encyclopedia that told me more about this world, so I didn't feel like I walked away with a couple of things just hanging in the air, like how the hell has humanity managed to survive on a planet that is like 30% desert and 46 degrees on a mild day? Yeah, maybe just that. Maybe if the developers added like a patch that would add a little encyclopedia that told me more about the world, that would be great. Just a little bit extra would not go astray. But if you're willing to put down 35 bucks Australian for a 4-hour experience that is legitimately beautiful, has some engaging but not too difficult gameplay to help support its narrative, and an interesting sort of set of circumstances to help you learn about the space station, what happened to it, what happened to the occupants, and what eventually turned out of them. And when I say it's interesting, I mean it. It is a pretty interesting plot, development, setup, and just general payoff. I have said multiple times in this video that the story kind of leaves you with a couple of gaps that you would like filled in, but it's not like they have, like, plot holes. You know what happened to all the major characters. You know what happened to the main character, his motivation, and the motivations of the character who sends you up here in the first place. And it doesn't leave any, like, major, like, plot holes open as to what happened to anyone in particular except, like, one guy. So it's fine in that sense. You won't walk away thinking that they completely forgot to, like, finish up the plot or something. If you're willing to put down the money for a 4-hour experience like that, at the end you'll come away saying, I enjoyed that. It was like a nice TV show. Actually, yeah, that's a good comparison, actually. If you play this game, like, say, half an hour, 45 minutes at a time, like every time you swap to a new level, you put it down and then you pick it back up later, it'll feel like a nice mini-series. And, yeah, that's actually a good way to approach it. Play every 45 minutes to an hour to get through every major level and play it like a TV miniseries and you'll probably enjoy it a lot more. Then you'll come away from it thinking, oh, that was fun. I enjoyed that. I didn't mind finding out what happened to them and it looked really great in the process. Pretty good for seeing what a high-end PC can do at this point. I'd like to see what had happened to the console versions, but, well, they'll probably be fine in all honesty. It just needs a fair bit of optimization, get rid of those loading tremors. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and let you watch the rest of this level. It's got a fair bit more to go, because as I said, the major set piece where the station blows up hasn't actually happened yet, and I'll let you just sit around and listen to the sound design, because I will admit, there's very little in the way of sound design in this game that isn't like the voice acting. There's very little soundtrack, except for the really important bits, and it's kind of neat in that sense, just how isolating it could feel when they actively decide to turn off the music. They'll give you a little chime when you're making proper progress, which is fun. But at the same time, they'll put in the music just when it feels relevant. They don't, like, overuse or underuse music in this game at all. It's a really nice balance, and it helps add to the station, which I appreciate. So, yeah, I'm gonna shut up and let you listen to it for a bit. This has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.
Life support shutting down. Oxygen reserves low. Life support offline. Oxygen reserves critical. Life support offline. Oxygen reserves nearly exhausted.